And you know, her sister went on the same list. She did? Oh, yeah, it was hospitalized like not long after she was.
I'm on morning detail now.
Good evening, everyone. We have to welcome to our March 17th board meeting. Would everyone please rise to pledge the flag? Have roll call?
Mr. Acker,
Here.
Mr. Azar,
Here.
Dr. Cadman,
Here.
Mr. Fleming,
Here.
Mr. Medensky, Mrs. Pusateri,
Here.
Mr. Robeson,
Here.
Mrs. Tierney,
Here.
Mrs. Pachalski.
Here. Dr. may we have the superintendent's report?
Yes, we look at the screen.
We're waiting for the screen to line up for those who are attending in person. Thank you, Mrs. Pashowski. It's very much my pleasure to welcome our board back in person to our administration office, and happy St. Patrick's Day to those who are celebrating. But I thought I'd begin my superintendent's report by giving a return to school update. The vast majority of Abington Heights students returned to full-time in-person instruction on March 8th, 2021. 15 to 20% of our students are still at home receiving all virtual instruction by request of the family. I'm very pleased to say that enthusiasm among students and staff has been exceedingly high. There is a palpable energy in the building. So it's, again, a very, very positive start. And we're very grateful for all the work and effort that went into bringing our students back to school. We are well underway with sports and extracurricular activities. Winter sports are quickly winding down. We want to wish our wrestling team all the best tonight as they are off at Delaware Valley. And spring sports are as quickly gearing up. And our administration, our students, our staff are very much also now engaged in, if you can believe it, end of the year activities. For example, I know there's been a lot of discussion recently about the prom, graduation, move-up days, field days. And so, a great amount of work and effort is going on. I will say, however, right, that we are in March and we're talking about activities that will be occurring in May. And particularly in 2020, 2021, there's a world of time between now and the end of the school year. And it's very, very hard to predict, what is happening. I know Mr. Snyder is looking for student input as far as the prom. I mean, the prom is a big one. That is on many, many people's minds. And we're looking forward to hearing back from our students. Now, what we want to do is be clear about, expectations. And I know the board wants to talk about this, so I have a note here for the board to discuss it. But, for example, if today on March 17th, I was asked, could we hold a prom tomorrow indoors with 300 to 500 students eating and dancing, right? The answer would be a resounding no, right? Now, does that mean no on March 17th? Means no in May? Absolutely not, right? But we have to plan for different outcomes. We have to be flexible in our approach. That planning is going on. Everyone wants great things at the end of the year, but we must do so in a way that, is respectful of the conditions that are in place when we're having those events, right? And it's very, very hard for us to predict now what will the case be in May. So it behooves all of us to have multiple options to have a successful conclusion to the year. And so with that, again, I know the board had some thoughts or wanted to at least pause, have some discussion about these types of activities.
Well, what are your thoughts for contingent plans? Like what?
Right. Well, I mean, one idea is to have a traditional prom indoors in a well-ventilated facility, right? Wouldn't it be nice if we had to go outside, right? We have a beautiful new stadium, right, where we can have maybe some kind of traditional. There's the gazebo over at the park where there's some possibilities there, and most of all, we want to hear from our students, right? They're creative. It is their day. We want to gain their insight. And again, if someone takes the view we can only have a prom as we always had it before, that may be true, but they may be sorely disappointed because it just may not be possible when that comes around. So the idea is Mr. Snyder is reaching out and listening for voices, because while we may come up with an idea, it's most critical that the students come up with an idea that fits what it is they're looking to do. Right.
Well ventilated.
Right.
So,
Yes, and there are some venues that have both an indoor and outdoor component.
right, like
and-
Constantina.
And so those are some of the discussions that are going on,
Okay,
you know, so yes, but we're not going to have a definitive yes or no. The only thing we say definitively is that we want to have great things for our kids at the end of the year. Okay,
Don't you think you should set a deadline, a date to come up with some type of decision or discussion? Now you're collecting information, you're collecting all different types, indoor, outdoor. Also listening to what the guidelines are going to be. We're slowly opening up more. So have you set a timeline on this so we can make a, decision for these venues to be booked or temporarily, maybe make phone calls now to kind of get the ball rolling for this?
well, I know phone calls are being made and people are telling us their capacity, given current regulations, which I think are very rapidly changing. And so all of that is being done. Just the venues themselves are, hey, we want you here. We're working through this. And so all of that is happening. I think we would be hesitant to say we must know by this date, because like last year with graduation, had we done that, we might not have been able to have some of the opportunities that, came last minute to us. So we're dealing with uncertainty. I get it that it's not a comfortable thing when it's your senior year and you want to have all the good things happening at the end and you want to have it on your calendar and know when and where. My hope is that we'll be having it. The when and the where are definitely up in the air right now.
So the high school has a committee. Is that right, Mr. Schneider? The high school has a committee of both student population and administration.
And then would that have, and guest?
I would, I would guess. Class, I would guess.
Thank you for your efforts and continuing to work on this because it's important, as you know, how important it is to the student population. So thank you, Mr. Schneider.
And I'll tell you, they're also planning outdoor concerts this spring for our orchestra and our band. So all of this is going on. We want students to be engaged. They are engaged. But we just have to find ways to do it that are, different than we've done it in the past. So a
Dr.
lot of
Mann.
great things will be coming, right? Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. What about the play? How are you coordinating the play this year?
Yes, Freaky Friday is the play. They have a whole list of procedure safety, just as a sports will have a lot of list of things they have to do. The play has an extensive list of safety protocols that they have in place. I think they got through auditions and I think they're well underway in their practices, just as our spring teams are underway in their practices.
I'm just curious how the audience is going to work. How many?
Oh, I think we're looking at virtual possibly. Yeah.
You do have the rights to stream.
Okay,
Dr.
right.
Mann, I have one more question
Yes.
about extracurriculars. The unified track team, are they able to participate this year? in
Yes,
a
I think
spring?
we are definitely having that team. And they'll be doing a little bocce ball on the side. I think, I don't know if I mentioned, we have a court up there for
Great,
for
thank
that,
you.
with gratitude for the board. All right, so we move on. Okay. Okay, I do want to emphasize, though, that students, as far as our return to school, COVID mitigation is high on our list, tops of our list. Students and staff are universally complying with masking requirements. Administrative and maintenance staff are making the most of available space. You all saw the trailers of storage that we have to, for our furniture that we have outside. COVID cases are occurring among our students in the community. All right. Not in school. We have no transmission in school, but we have numerous cases in the community. Our contact tracing efforts remain a central focus. There have been 6 positive cases and 73 quarantines since our return to school. All right. Yeah. Yes.
So the contact tracing, and this came up.
We would say 6 feet for 15 minutes is our rule. And we say that if you're in a class and you're sit within 6 feet, whether it's 10 feet, we will quarantine you. If you're on a school bus and you're sitting within 6 feet, even if it's 15 minutes, you are quarantined.
So do we apply those same rules then to athletics?
Right.
Do we then ask them to quarantine?
Yes, if we have a positive case, we most likely are shutting down the team, or at least the vast number of people on the team, right? So yes, absolutely, people on the team come in contact with a positive case on the team, they're quarantined. Now, in the case of the basketball, right, the positive cases on the other team, we reached out to the Department of Health, and their initial guidance was that all of the other team had to quarantine because they're in the locker room, they're on the bus, they're in the close proximity. Their ruling was that because Abington Heights was on the floor, no close for 15 minutes, whatever thing they used, they said that our team did not have to do quarantining. However, we learned the next day that actually 2 players from the opposing team were participating while potentially positive. In the view of the Department of Health, they said 2 is 1 too many, and therefore we all had to quarantine, which we're doing now.
All right, I feel like that's a little inconsistent with what our policy is. I think we had clearly had contact, it should have been quarantined. I just want to, going forward, I'm just trying to understand what our rules are with contact with the positive case and how we would quarantine our teams, our athletes. And
Well, it's very easy when we have a case on our team, when the case is ours, right? It is less clear. For example, again, basketball is a harder case because there's close contact. Now, is it 6 feet, 15 minutes? That's where there was ambiguity, where we reached out for help. Now, in the case of, like, say, baseball, if the opposing team's right fielder has a positive case, right, that's different than if you're playing, field hockey or lacrosse. And so when the case is ours, it's very clear how we handle it, right? If there's an opposing player and they didn't play in the game, like, those are all specifics that we don't take upon ourselves to try to judge. We reach out to the Department of Health and rely on their guidance for those types of unusual circumstances.
I just want to make sure that we mitigate the risk that would shut down a classroom. I don't want to see
We surely,
classrooms shut down.
So
So
our administrators here are up till all hours of the night and weekends constantly, contact tracing, calling parents, and we won't open a school until we're through and we're confident that we've done what we need to do. And so I really want to commend the hours and hours and hours of work, and probably Megan Buck is listening from home tonight. She coordinates this. She has sheets and emails, and we track and we trace and we call and we say, you're back here, but not there. For example, we recently changed our quarantine back to 14 days because we found 2 instances where people legitimately came back after 10, and then on the 11th day, they developed symptoms, right? So now instead of just having a 10-day quarantine, you're going to be out for 14 days unless you get a test, you get 2 days and a doctor's note that says you're able to come back, and that would be at 10. So we're constantly monitoring how we do this. We take it as seriously as anything we do because we feel that while wearing the masks and having people out of the building who are potentially contacts is an important part of mitigation of COVID transmission. Now in Ohio, they're saying they're quarantining too many. Ohio would say we are quarantining too many, right? But until we hear differently from Pennsylvania, we're going to keep in the path that we're on. Okay.
And Kevin, I just had a comment. Just going back to the basketball issue. I have to say that I was extremely surprised by the initial decision that was made to allow Abington to play in the playoff game. I thought it was a clear-cut case of exposure. Having watched the video of the game and other games prior to that, knowing that masks are not properly worn, most noses are exposed. Actually, this virus lives more in the nose than it does in the mouth. And the fact that even those who make, good attempts to keep their masks on are touching their noses, touching their faces, touching their masks, touching the ball, high-fiving before every foul shot. To me, it was a clear-cut case of exposure. So my concern is that, when somebody says that they have a mask or the team wore a mask, I think there's different ways to wear your mask. There's, the appropriate way that when the kids are in school and a teacher, is witnessing them, watching them all the time, they can maintain and have control over the masking. I think that in a lot of these sporting events, the masks, they're making decent effort, but there's not proper mitigation as far as like mask wearing is supposed to be. So, like I said, my concern is that to say they had masks on, partially on, maybe not on at all, not on at all times, really, doesn't kind of fit the bill in terms of mitigation. And then having the students back in school only 3 feet apart, and you're reporting 6 positive cases and 73 quarantines, I guess over the period of 2 weeks. I mean, to me, these kids are asymptomatic carriers. So to say that they're not spreading it among themselves or there's nobody that would test positive if you had tested them all, I think, is a bit naive. And that's my concern. And that's been my concern, doing too much. I think we also kind of said goodbye to the promise, the whatever athletic promise that they wouldn't play in other places. So if the focus is back to school and, education, I think coming up, you're going to tell us about the fact that education is suffering, as a result, of COVID and everything. I would just caution parents, I guess, to be more aware, of some of these extracurricular activities that are taking place and the potential for, what I deem what I think is, true exposure, even though it's not always classified that way, obviously.
Okay, and Mrs. Cavan raises a very important point. Let me just go back. I skipped here. Sorry. And so getting to the third point, students can expect 3 feet of physical distancing in classrooms and 6 feet of physical distancing while eating. And that is something we've said up front from the very beginning. And 3 feet is the expectation. But I do want to report, and of course, this is the big concern that has been discussed, is whether it's 3 feet or 6 feet. And those conversations continue both locally and nationally. There was some emerging information since our last meeting that I thought the board would be encouraged to hear. So the topic of 3 feet versus 6 feet of physical distancing has been the most challenging we faced and has the greatest impact on in-person instruction. Because after all, that's the thing that allows us to be back or not. If you need 6 feet, your kids are home in hybrid. If you're going to accept 3, then we can be open as we are, right? The CDC, to be clear, the CDC and PDE have adopted the 6-foot standard. As presented last month, and all the presentations are posted online if you wanted to check out. There's a lot of links to last month's presentation. There is growing evidence that 3 feet is appropriate, especially given the harms imposed on children by detachment, neglect, and isolation when they are home from school. And so important new information was released this week that should help in our ongoing discussion of this important issue. So I want to call to the board's attention, and this actually has exploded into the news over the past several days. All right, a new study in the journal Clinical Infectious Disease indicates, and this is an extensive study that took place in Massachusetts, no significant difference in transmission between 3 feet and 6 feet social distancing in schools. And in response to the release of this survey, the CDC announced this week that it will re-examine its 6 feet guidance in light of the study. And if you all remember the Bucks County when we were back in December, and we were so torn because the Bucks County guidance, you can do 3 feet. And many people went with that direction. And we, I think, understandably said, well, until we see it from the CDC, we're not, right? But, you know, that was something that was way back in August they were talking about. And now there's more and more emerging evidence that 3 feet is good, right? And so the actual study is linked there, and I encourage people to take a look at it. And then the other article that came out this week that if there's one thing I'd encourage people to read, it would be this article. A group of scientists who were cited by the CDC in their main report as arguing against coming back to school, right? Those scientists themselves issued an article, and I'd encourage you to read it there, saying that 3 feet physical distancing does it. And if that's what you need to get kids back in school, use it, right? Because that they're suggesting there really is no good evidence for 6 feet. 3 feet is where you need to be to get your kids back in school. Now, I say this, right? And in the same breath, we'll tell you that in no way does this emerging information reduce our concerns about COVID transmission in our schools and our community. COVID is a dangerous disease, all right? And we will always maintain that. But as we try to balance all of the dangers of the pandemic, again, there's some emerging information that 3 feet is a good standard for us to be using. And if the research were in the opposite direction, you'd be seeing that just as well, right? And so I took a slide based upon a report of that study. And this is from Massachusetts. In fact, this study has prompted the Department of Ed in Massachusetts to order their schools to go back full-time, all in April, all right, and not to worry about the 6 feet, but rather the 3 feet standard. And so after months and months of collecting data, the gray and the blue are adult transmission, and we know that adults transmit this more than children in school. And you see, actually, there's not only is there no significant difference, there, you can see that it's just very, very close. And the same thing for students. It's almost identical for the 3 feet and the 6 feet standard. So again, it's dangerous. We have to worry about it. We need to be vigilant, but there is encouraging news on this front. And we're hoping, as the CDC said they'll re-examine the information they have provided us with 3 or 6 feet.
I just want to comment. I did read the studies. Of course, with every study, they have their limitations, you know what I mean? And things like that. In the Massachusetts study, they did include, it said that the districts that permitted a minimum of greater or equal to 3 feet, even if greater distances were preferred and implemented, were classified as allowing greater or equal than 3 feet. Similarly, different districts that allowed greater or equal to 3 feet for some grades, even if not for all, were additionally classified as those allowing 3 feet of distancing. two districts, 3 feet among some grades, but 6 feet for others. And the majority of districts open with lower on-campus enrollments at the time that the study was done. Thank you.
And I would say that we have about 20% of our students who are home. So I think many of those delimitations would also apply to Abington Heights. Again, not to be argumentative, but I think that many of that does in fact apply to our circumstances here. Couple of issues that have come up. The first is requests, right? There have been numerous requests from families to change from all virtual to full in-person instruction, right? Since we got back, a couple families thought, well, I want to re-examine my decision to go all virtual. At the time, we said that we are going to not allow any transition until April. But in light of these many requests, administration would like, with the board's permission, to move up our survey to as early as next week to try to find out how many people would like to return. Once we have that back, then it's for administrators to move desks, because we have it really spaced out. We just can't have them come in. But we would move desks and make accommodations to allow for those extra students and then welcome them back, and not essentially a month earlier than we had planned. Because we don't want to keep people home any longer than they should. But since we were very clear that the plan was in April, I wanted to raise this with the board to make sure that that would be okay if there are any objections.
Does this mostly impact the high school? Don't we have a large population already in elementary back?
Yes, about 85-90% of elementary back, although I think some would like to come back, even in that small group. This mostly applies to the high school.
So how would that impact our virtual?
Well, see, at the high school, we have in-person and virtual running simultaneously in the same classroom.
Oh, okay.
So there would be fewer home, but it
It won't have any impact
I
on,
don't think it had much of an
on
impact.
staffing.
Correct.
Okay.
I think it'd have actually no impact on staffing at all. So long as the board is okay with that, I think that's a good thing for us to be able to go ahead and do. Okay, all right. And then the next is standardized testing. Standardized testing takes place each spring. We've all talked about the PSSA every year for a long time. Keystone exams are subject area exams that are taken at the high school. The PA Department of Education has allowed districts to move testing, if they want to the fall of 2021, right? Now, there's a good argument to be made for the spring and a good argument to be made for the fall. And I think the better argument is no testing at all, but that's not an option, right? And so in talking to our administrators who spoke with the faculty, right, our thought right now, and my thought right now, right, is that moving the exams to the fall allows us to focus on the academic and social emotional needs of our students right now as they're coming back, all right, without the weeks-long interruption of standardized testing. And now, so that's what we would like to do. The flip side of the art, well, it's a delay and you have to take it all next year and you want a smooth start and all that. And all that is legitimate. But I thought right now we are so focused on getting kids back and getting kids up and running and getting some distance and consistency back. We hate to break it up by having 3 weeks of testing. And so, I open that up for any discussion that the board might want to have.
Well, I believe it's clearly your decisions because we would support that, but wouldn't having the students tested in the fall not be an accurate testing because they would have the whole summer off?
Yeah, I think it is. I don't think it's going to be accurate in the spring. I think it's going to be less accurate in the fall. If I thought we really would be having differences in data quality by moving it from one place to the other, then I'd be inclined to say, well, let's have it where the data quality is highest. But I really do question the quality of any data we're going to get if in a couple of weeks we have to start, doing, reviews for. So I'm not disputing.
And there's your answer.
I'm not disputing at all what you're saying. I think in ideal circumstances, we would much rather, like if we were just in play, we would never consider giving it in the fall. But with the way things are right now, focusing on the administration of a test over a few weeks. It just does not want to be things that we want to focus on.
So independently of that,
Yeah.
PSSA, how are we going to evaluate where our kids are now as a result of all this
Yes.
of COVID? I mean,
Yes.
we must have some other testing
do.
planned or some other
We do.
assessment.
For example, we were speaking to our elementary principals who are here about our benchmark testing. And those are periodic tests that the board has allowed us to buy a program that's nationally normed that allows us to get a sense of how we're moving here, right? And the results are not good, particularly, and many students are doing well, don't get me wrong. Kids are doing fine, but there are many students, particularly the youngest kids, who are lagging behind in their learning to read. All right, and you know, every day, if you remember, we did the Wilson reading program and foundations, and that is all based upon saying and repeating and the whole interaction in the classroom, and we're lacking that, right? So we're finding that there is very real academic damage that has occurred. And then at our high school and our middle school, I mean, quarter grades mean something and test grades mean something, and we are finding really high numbers of kids, who far more than ever before, who are not just failing, but failing badly. And we're taking that they have just disconnected. And if you remember in hybrid, our teachers taught hybrid better than anyone else, right? But it was still hybrid. And in many instances, you walk the halls, you find attendance at the end of the time that we were in hybrid, very low. People were virtual. It was just as good as they were doing. Kids were not gaining what they would normally gain. And so we are behind, and particularly some of our, you know, at-risk students are disconnected under normal circumstances, have been particularly hard hit in this time. Does any of the principals want to offer any thoughts on what they're saying? I did ask the principals to come out tonight because I know we have a lot of questions about this, and I know they're better able to answer this than I am. So any thoughts you care to offer?
I have a question. The seniors, are they able to still go forward with their post-high school decisions? Are they working with guidance? Are they moving on to their different places where they're going and getting accepted okay.
College acceptance. Graduation requirements. Letter out. From
Great, thank you.
A sense that people will elect to repeat a grade at any level?
high school, matter of credits. Class. You have the summer they however long it have credit thresholds. Graduate.
And I think we'd be very resistant to repeating grades at the lower levels, thinking that we would need to intervene and remediate to prevent the lost year, but rather to have added supports as the student continues to go to school. I think is that correct? I'm very confident you'd agree with that, right? Okay, so, right. All right, so moving on now. Instructional planning. So we're in a crisis. I think that it really is clear. Not all of our students, not every one of our students, but as a district, we're in a crisis because many of our students themselves are in a crisis. A colleague of mine recently stated that every public school district is in a state of crisis as a result of the impact of the pandemic on its students. And our actions must be urgent because the need is great. And I believe that to be true here. High achieving and motivated students at the start of the pandemic are now doing well, right? If you went into the pandemic, motivated, doing well, you came out of the pandemic, motivated, doing well, right? Many students, however, have suffered in multiple dimensions, and our efforts must now focus on this substantial group of students. And so, as we mentioned, rates of failure among middle and high school students are at all-time highs. Benchmark assessments, which Dr. Thomas and Mrs. Frauenfelker spoke of, indicate serious struggles for our students, especially our primary students in learning to read, and social and emotional challenges and crises are less measurable, but they abound, right? We are seeing them every day in many, many different, very disturbing manifestations. And so some immediate actions. Students identified in particular need for academic assistance will be invited to tutoring. Tutoring will be after school, virtual, or extended to the summer. And we anticipate letters going out to those initially identified students on Monday. And we certainly hope to expand this as the program develops. An expanded extended school year summer program will be offered. We always offer extended school year for a set number of students, but we're expanding on that offering. And as Mr. Snyder was speaking, a new summer school program for credit recovery will be offered at the high school, and we're working on plans to get that up and running. Day-to-day work is being done to identify and address the unique challenges faced by our students. There's not a teacher, guidance counselor, social worker, nurse, administrator who day in and day out is not working to identify needs and address those needs for our kids. And we're also looking at the roles and responsibilities of our student assistance program and re-examining them in light of how we can do better with that program in light of the pandemic and the internal services were offered with social workers that were not offered before. So again, these are some of the immediate things that we're doing and planning, right? But planning for fall 2021 is a challenge because of the inherent uncertainty associated with the pandemic, especially in predicting enrollments, right? This is our problem, right? If we knew exactly where students were going to be on the first day in the fall, right, we would have a plan ready to go, right? But we don't, and therefore that uncertainty is a challenge. It's inherent in the planning process for us. However, we believe a fully virtual option must be available for any family who requests it. Now, we'd like to know how many families are going to request it, but we don't at this point. We also think that all teachers must be freed from teaching virtual and in-person students simultaneously. Our teachers have done incredible work, but this is a flawed model and one that we have to move away from if we're going to break out of the pandemic and the educational barriers that it imposes on us. Positions in our elementary schools that were diverted during the pandemic should be restored. And that's an obvious. We've had reading teachers, instructional support teachers, just out of necessity and doing, stepping up, teaching classroom grades, but we've been without the remediation services at a time where we need the most. Right? We had to shut down our Common Connect computer programming specials this year because that teacher we had to call on to do. Those teachers have to come back, right? We really need those supports. And we also need additional remediation and social emotional support positions. We really must consider those grade needs with staffing that address them. So as far as planning for the fall, and again, everything we're looking at here is tentative based upon need that we don't know what it is. And this is, again, putting this out for consideration and discussion initially, and we're going to need lots of input and discussion going forward to get this both from the administrators, the board, the teachers, the community. So as far as the high school new positions, if we're moving away from the teaching in the classroom and teaching simultaneously virtually, we were looking at considering a new subject area teacher in each discipline, right? And that would free up ability to have students who are at home having a very substantial course catalog while having teachers who are in the building teaching kids just doing that, teaching the students in class.
Is there a limit to how many students a virtual teacher can teach?
Well, I think in the contract, we endeavor to keep it at 30. And I think that is very reasonable because there's a lot of work to teaching virtually as well. So I think we would probably look roughly to say virtual and in-person teachers should have similar limits on their class sizes. Because like in some virtual settings, it's a matter of posting a video and 1,000 people look at it and you turn in your paper and 7 graduate assistants correct it. That is not our approach. We would have in-person, on camera, live scheduled instruction, interaction with all kids. And so the class size limitations that apply for in-person, I think would be approximated in all virtual.
And have any of our current cyber students who were cyber prior to the pandemic expressed an interest in attending a virtual class that we would offer?
I actually wrote to our cyber parents, and any of you listening, I would tell you now, we would love to have you back. And we've had several who have taken us up on the offer either to come back or to engage in some conversations. Now, not a large number, but some, yes.
So if we put this virtual instruction program in place, would we still have to pay for students in Abington Heights to go to a charter program?
If any parent or student can.
Dr. Main.
Yes.
Fridays are.
Yes.
Next year, if you implement a virtual platform in the middle school and the high school, it'll be implemented the same, or probably don't know yet, but have you thought about potentially implementing it differently than the coterminous way it's being done currently for the whole school day? Would it be a shorter schedule for like a normal charter experience might not be the entire day, or is it going to?
We have not, no, what we've always said is that at the end of a time period, students should be in the same place, whether they're virtual or in person. But the instructional methodologies are certainly different, right, in virtual and in-person learning. Now, I don't know that we've gotten beyond to say that the days are structured differently, but it's certainly a very good conversation for us to have. But at the core, the second thing that we say is that the experience must be interactive, person to person. And so that, I think, we want to make sure that that component remains. Minutes and specifics, I think everyone is open to trying to find the best way to do it. Okay. And then we see a similar suggestion at the middle school, whereas instead of subject area teachers at grades 5 and 6, we have people who can teach broad ranges of subjects at elementary. These are certification issues, not board issues at all, but these are Pennsylvania certification issues. So we would think we would have 2 staff members at the 5 and 6 grade level, and then 2 staff members with different certifications at the 7 and 8 level. I know Mrs. Leonard is trying to figure out exactly what this looks like with staffing. And then we also think that with the increased social emotional needs at the middle school, we would wish to add a social worker in the building. Okay. And then,
Dr. Mann,
yes,
do new positions translate to new headcount?
yes, they do. They do. And we have, over time, demonstrated the ability to reduce staff when we can through attrition. But to your point, the headcount would spike for sure with the addition of this number of staff
At a huge cost.
at a huge cost.
Do we know what that cost is?
We'll get
Okay.
down to it, right?
Dr. Mayan, will
Yes.
the salary schedule still be the same for the virtual instructor as opposed to the professional staff
Yes,
in the
they will all
buildings?
be,
The same?
and we would think they'd be interchangeable too,
Okay.
right? And
mhm.
so, yes, they would all be our teachers governed by the collective bargaining agreement.
And Jean Kevin, I have a question. So if there was no longer any subscription to a certain position, virtual position, that teacher would still, you know,
Right, they
it's
would be
not-
in
we
town.
don't eliminate new teachers then if everybody comes back to the classroom and the virtual option only goes on for a year or something.
That is correct. We would look to very likely reduce high class sizes, which we've had. And then over time, we would make decisions about not replacing retirements, attritional savings, to eventually adjust the number to where the board would want it to be.
Could we consider taking cyber charter students from other districts at get tuition to help pay for the cost of the virtual program?
That would require a change in board policy, because we have had a strict policy against tuition. And so certainly I think we would be open to that idea. Might be a very good one, actually. I think we probably want to be careful about taking in-person tuition, because that increases the number with social distancing in our buildings. But I think that's worth writing down and getting back to if we wanted to, because we'll do it well. We'll do it great because we have great people, and perhaps that might be of interest to others.
Well, my hope would be that we would significantly reduce the tuition we're paying to cyber charters. And then if we could possibly even have tuition,
Right.
we could cover a lot of this
Right.
cost of hiring all these extra positions.
Right, because unlike at cyber charters, I understand, our cyber students will be able to go on field trips and they'll be able to play their activities with their colleagues. So they'd be able to integrate themselves in ways that would never be possible in cyber charter. So I think it makes a compelling case that we try to make, that students should come back to us because we would love to have them. That's the thing, truly. And then if there's an interest in other districts, for students who want to be all virtual, I think that's a very good thing that we'll have to make a note to think about in the near future.
Louise, you're suggesting possible tuition for the virtual planning only,
Well,
right?
I mean, I guess we would have to look at our board policy and see what we would be allowed to do, but I'm just saying, if we have the tuitions, if we have the program and we have the positions and, the professional staff and we do it well, but we only have, let's say we only have 10 kids in a class, why not take tuition from other students who might want to participate in our virtual program instead of another cyber program?
You're talking virtual. That was my
Yes,
question.
Yes, I'm
Okay.
calling it, yes.
Okay.
But I'm
Not the
really-
in-person tuition into the buildings.
Well, that's another conversation. I
Okay,
guess, so.
okay.
Dr. Mann,
Yes.
so on that topic, obviously the biggest unknown here is we don't know how many kids are going to be virtual in all these grades. And we're not the only school district that's facing this. Is there anything that can be done collaboratively with other school districts or at the NEIU level to do something like this together?
I think there would be a number of conversations involved. I will tell you, in special education, we have a class that we just are going to continue for the second year, where we are providing services that other districts are sending children to. And it's virtual, right? So we're doing some of that, and I think we would be certainly open to doing more. But again, it all comes down to planning and knowing numbers, and that's really our challenge. And compounding the fact is that we always, right now, our administrators, usually this year, all are heavily involved in the search to find new employees, right? To find new staff. They have a long and rigorous process, and we don't like to wait because then we lose to other people. So we like to get moving early, but in the same way, it's hard to move early because we don't know what it is we're actually looking to do. So that's another confounding variable in this.
Do we
So-
know what our funding expectations are of the latest relief?
We do, and Mr. Mirabelli has a bunch of slides right after
And
this.
that, I assume, could help with some of the costs of what we're planning here.
It can, with the caveat that it's not recurring funding and all that
I
we've talked, but
understand.
yes.
I
it's
just
yes.
think that if we were to offer and develop a quality program, invest the money that we're given now, I really do believe that it could be a successful cyber program alternative that our current cyber students prior to the pandemic, as well as other districts
Right.
might pay for. And I
Right.
think it could be a self-sustaining program.
Right, and Mr. Mirabelli has the very upsetting numbers on cybers in one of his, not to, spoil your thing there, right? And then moving on now, elementary.
I have a quick question.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Assuming a in-person option is available next year, for those families who choose to send their kids to virtual, any consideration, and the answer is probably not, haven't thought of it yet, but is any consideration being given to charging those families type of surcharge for the, to offset the extra costs?
No.
And no, it won't be considered, or it can't be considered.
I think the best thing I can say right now, just no. I'm smiling through my mask, but yeah.
It seems to me that, public schools are built and designed for in-person learning. Virtual learning, as long as it's an option, not a requirement, is an option that, we don't have to offer.
Well, we do, because we have to pay tuition for if they want it, we have to pay.
Right.
What's our
Yeah,
tuition?
Yeah, see, the thing is, we'd be stymied because if we told a family no that they had to pay, then they have a very easy option that costs us $20,000. That gives them computers and all that.
But there's got to be a cost,
Correct. Right.
right? So there has to be
Or
a
we can
cost
pay
benefit
$500,000
analysis
for
done
extra
on
teachers.
how much is a cyber charter school compared to how much it's going to cost us to have our own.
It's a no-win situation.
then on the other side of it, we have medically fragile children, medically fragile families who, we are a public school, and in the wake of a pandemic, we aspire to meet the needs of our families and meet them where they are. And that's the challenge that we have. And I think more and more as the pandemic gets under control and it becomes more of an endemic than a pandemic, and it becomes hopefully over time something that we manage, then these things I think go. But I also think that there will be permanent change in what we do in public ed as a result of this year off. I think,
I look at students that have to miss an extended amount of time due to an illness or an accident. And if there's an option for some way for them to, continue with their education where otherwise, rather than staying home and missing, I just think there's.
If you look at the numbers, we're talking about a lot of money
for
to
the-
hire all these teachers that
Right.
we can't just shed.
No, but
when
like
it's
Dean
over.
said, you would have to do a cost benefit analysis, and
I would like a better understanding of that. For that student that has that accident that's out for a few weeks, can they go virtual, or do they do the homeschooling and get their homework assignments from their in class?
Right.
Right.
And this has been a challenging question, and we've taken the following position, right? If a student is quarantined, right, because of exposure, then we make accommodations for virtual. It's a little harder at the elementary, but much easier at the middle and the high school. They just go to virtual, right? If they're out for reasons beyond being quarantined, we do not allow them to access virtual. It's the old-fashioned way of getting their assignments. We say that because our fear is, it's more than a fear, it's what would happen, that we've had great difficulty with people straddling between the virtual and the in-person. And if we allowed for someone to say, I need a sick day, I need to be off, I'm a little under the weather, I want to access virtual that day, we would never be able to get all our kids in to school, and our staff would be, again, back in that straddling area. So, we recognize that in many instances that may not be popular among some, but we think it's a necessary step for us to take in order to move back toward normalcy of getting our kids in the schools.
So you will be doing a survey before we do any hiring, you'll do a survey with
yeah.
families that are looking to continue to do virtual? So we
Yeah.
get an understanding of what our numbers are
We
before
are-
we go out and hire
Right.
for virtual?
We are so unsettled talking about staffing and the associated costs with the uncertainty of number, like this is, but like, we have to start the conversation.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
so
And
that's-
I'm in favor of,
So we are
hiring more
talking,
staff,
right,
yeah.
so no one is going to be hiring anybody. No one is like, this is day one. Now, we've been planning a long time, to credit of all the staff. But this is day one of coming to the board and saying, here are some plans, here are some challenges, here are the barriers, and let's continue to work together to overcome all of them in whatever way that is.
I could see or foresee just doing it at the high school, having hiring the teachers for the high school, or maybe high school, middle school, because I'm expecting elementary will have a high physical return to school. And for those few students, and it might be so few, that would be worth paying if you were to have to pay for
Right.
an outside cyber program.
Right.
So I think that's
Right.
an option too. We don't have to, it's not an all or none.
No, right. And we've looked at third-party vendors who will provide a teacher and a curriculum
Mhm.
for teachers. And we've worried about the quality actually of what they're offered, but it is an option, a very costly one, actually, to do it à la carte, so to speak. The bill adds up very quickly. Now, it's flexible in that it's not a recurring issue, but it's one of the solutions that we're considering, but not an obvious one, nor are any of these really obvious. It's just the thing, right?
But if
And
you do
so-
it for just to jump, if you do that for 1 year, it's a 1 year, like we might have to spend more money in that first year, but hire all these teachers. If it's a permanent increase in student size, then it's worthwhile, but it would be worth it to overspend for a year or two. But nobody knows when this is going away.
That is
So,
correct.
but it would give us an option.
Right. And I will tell you also, Mr. Azar, our class sizes have always been, we have intentionally, over time, maxed out our staff, right, with high class sizes and the lowest, we are efficient, right? And it was working very, very well prior to the pandemic. It was working magnificently, right? But right now, we went into the pandemic shorthanded. And when we go to the elementary slide, we'll see what we had to, slice and dice the whole operation to make it work because we don't have staffing, which was not a complaint. We were doing great. But when we bring in these extra people, you'll see in one of my subsequent slides that, we did not, like a lot of organizations had slack. And when things happen, they can adjust resources, right? We had no slack. And you'll see what some of the things we had to do. So developing a little slack in the system while at cost, as a fixed cost, is something that is worthy of the board's consideration. And I have a couple slides that will kind of point that out. And then so going to the last one, this is our elementary group. And so if you look here, the first is a classroom teacher, and that restores Common Connect. We cut our computer programming elective because we needed a teacher to go teach, right? So we have a teacher to restore. Now, if there are no kids who are virtual, then that is a self-solving problem, right? But if we do have kids that are virtual, we would like to have that program back, right? Also true of an instructional support teacher. These are teachers who go around and meet with parents and talk to them about, planning and improving their child based upon recommendations. We would like that person back to do this remediation. Same is true of a reading teacher. We took a person who does small group and individual reading remediation for struggling students. We said, you're not doing that anymore. You're going to teach it a class, right? We want that person back. So these are, and they may come back just naturally, but if they don't come back naturally, we need them back, right? So that, that's a lot of it is up in the air. What happens? We need those teachers back one way or the other, right? And then down as far as also reading teachers, as we said, our youngest kids are struggling the most with reading. We are suggesting, this is an ad, right, to go from 1 teacher to 1.5 teachers per building, which is an additional 2 reading teachers in the system. We're asking for an additional 2 social workers. Right now, we only have 1 guidance counselor per 2 buildings. By adding social workers, we would go from 1/4 to 3/4 of a social worker per building, which helps address the crisis level social emotional needs that our students are experiencing. And then we also would ask the board to consider an additional school nurse. We have Clark Summit Elementary is a designated spot where our medically fragile children attend. A nurse is there all the time. And currently we have less than a half nurse per building. If we were to add a nurse, it would increase the staffing to about 3/4 of a nurse per building, recognizing they also have duties in our non-public schools that they have to attend to. Right? So there's a legitimate question about cost that comes up. Yeah. Well, yes. And I spoke to the board, or actually, I think I wrote to the board earlier about administration. Right. Well, I don't think we would need more administrators because we'd have more teachers to observe. We would normally just be able to absorb that in a second, right? But the issue is we are, and this I use the word not lightly, unacceptably short in administration at the elementary level. At Clark Summit Elementary, and Mrs. Fraunfelker is here, and she would be the last to say it, right? We have increasing numbers of special ed students. We have our medically fragile children. We have our English as a second language students. It is our largest building, having consolidated it with Waverly. And no one would look at that building and say it doesn't need a principal, right? And many would look at that building and would say it needs a principal, an assistant principal, and an assistant director of special ed alone, right? We are doing it with half a principal, and that is unsustainable. So we think that if we were to hire 1 more elementary principal, we would assign a full-time principal to Clark Summit Elementary. 2 of our less involved buildings would have 1 principal, so it would be a half and a half. And then the 3rd principal would have responsibilities as a building principal and half-time curriculum. And with respect to cost, that would be a significant savings over where our administrative structure was some years ago, where we had an assistant superintendent, a director of curriculum and a director of math, and a director of language arts. We eliminated those two positions. If we bring one back at a principal position, we're still way ahead of where we were not all that long ago. So a very good case could be made, Mr. Acker, because they need help at the elementary schools. And yes, the added staff would be a challenge, but none of us would pause for a second. We'd love to have them, and we'd love to have the extra work that's involved in supervising them and evaluating them.
You
Right.
posted that, right?
I didn't post it, but
Okay,
we
we already.
yeah, the board felt good with it, but we didn't officially approve it, so I just thought,
Okay.
all right? So moving to the next slide. And if you remember, the board allowed us to purchase some forecasting software. I don't know if you remember, right? So this is the use of the software. And Mr. Mirabelli will be getting a lot more out of this in the future, but I took a jab at it, right? And this graph, oh, sorry. This graph is per pupil expenditures over time, right? And the green and the orange, I guess, would be all Pennsylvania school districts is the green, and the orange would be school districts like Abington Heights as far as demographic background from across districts like us across the state, right? And if you look back at 2010, our per pupil expenditure, PPE, right, which normalizes costs throughout the organization, was $10,877. The state average, and similarly, schools like us, back at that time was $12,068 per pupil expenditure. Now, over that time, our population has gone up and down, more down than up. We've adjusted. And you look 10 years forward, and you see that the state over that time increased its per pupil expenditures by 37.3%, whereas Abington Heights increased its per pupil expenditures by 19.5%. So the distance, which was already substantial back in 2010, right, the distance has grown. We've controlled cost over time. This board has controlled cost over time. And so when we look at what it is we're doing, right, there are operational ramifications to this, right? And to quantify the difference, because like what's a number, right? Each teacher is about $100,000. If you want to just have in the back of your head, use $100,000 per teacher. But if you look at if Abington Heights just spent at the state average, just the state average, all right, we would be increasing our budget by $12,255,000, which means we could hire 122 teachers, right? If we hired 122 teachers, we would be spending the state average, right? But we're not suggesting 122, right? So now that is not to minimize the cost, the impact on the budget and all of that, but it does put into context what it is we're asking, right? Because this board has done very well over time and can be very proud of the work we've done for our taxpayers.
And
Yes,
you have the same graph showing just cost of direct instructional costs.
and I can get that tomorrow, Mr. All those check boxes on the side, I will be able to do it.
Because these costs have a lot of non-instructional costs.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And in the end, regardless of the indicator, you'll see Abington Heights has done very well. Yeah. Yep. We could certainly do that. But this is the net increase. And we've improved our operations. We've defeased debt. We have done a lot of really good things over time to make this possible. Right. But again, I just put this in the context of what we're asking. Right. So that concludes. All right. So again, just reiterating, preliminary presentation ideas, plans will change. And as a school community, we must work together to develop the best ideas possible. And I'm grateful right? For you to be here tonight and to be hit with all this in one shot. And while we're hitting you with things, can I call on Mr. Mirabelli for an update on budget? Because we're well past where we would normally be as far as our budget updates for the year. So.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be here in person presenting, so I could see if anyone, their head nods down or something like that. So good to be here talking budget, and it's an interesting time to be doing that because we're at the culmination of 3 years, right? So we just we're approving the audit report tonight. We're combing through data for the current year to see where are we going to end up, and then we're planning for next year. And there's so much uncertainty, and really we're throwing away all the trends, right? So what I want to do for you tonight is, you just heard a lot. You just heard some costly proposals, and I want to give you some context as to where we're at and what that might mean as you try to inform your decision going forward on those things. So a lot of hot topics: stimulus grants, charter school tuition, staffing, student staff safety, virtual online academy, and reconciling, as I said, the 3 irregular years of budget data. So I want to get right into the current year, right? So we'll talk about revenue first. And if you harken back to a year ago when this all started, we started thinking unemployment rate spiking, recession on the way. What's going to happen to the revenue? We really studied earned income tax. And I should note that the source of this information is your board summary report. So what I did was I went through and I said, let's set a threshold of $50,000, and I'm going to explain all variances greater than $50,000 year over year. And I guess I can say in summary that the earned income tax fears never came to fruition. And we are on par with where we were last year. And with the caveat of timing of payments, we are a little tiny bit ahead of where we were last year. So about halfway through the year, I have a graph on this. We've collected about half the taxes, right where we want to be. Real estate taxes, we're ahead of the game. We finished above budget. So there's a little bit of headwind as we go in to talk about some of the expenses we have challenges with. The only negative news over $50,000 is revenue from student activities. And we didn't have any student activities to charge at the gates, so we didn't generate any revenue there. Onto the expense highlights. Going through, there were some large variances year over year again that you'll see, and they can be boiled down to a few simple reasons. So when you look at the instructional variances and add them together, you're well over $1 million up over the prior year. And largely that is due to the increase in cyber charter tuition. It's also due to increases in salaries and benefits, contractual salary increases, as well as a few additional long-term substitutes that we brought in to fill in some needs. And so the Chromebooks, we bought about $250,000 of Chromebooks for distance learning for the students. And so it's about 1,100 Chromebooks, and I'll show you that. In the operation and maintenance of plant, we see a $327,000 positive variance year over year, and that was a decrease in salary and benefits. We had a number of custodians retire, which were replaced by subcontracted work. Also had favorable results with electricity and the water bill, with buildings not being occupied as much. And as far as transportation services, buses were not running on buses and vans didn't run on virtual days. To date, contractors have not been paid for that. There's some new legislation out, and also a lot of data to be collected. We'll have more to come on the bus contractors, working with them to gather as much information as possible. And then on the non-instructional side, we didn't pay coaches, we didn't pay referees, we didn't pay transportation to the games, restricted sports and activities in the fall. So that sort of sums up, the issues, the good news, the bad, where we fall year over year in the current year. So here's the biggest one. Let me move this. Okay. Charter school tuition cost. $1 million sounded like a ton of money to me last year when we spent it for the first time, or 2 years ago when we spent it for the first time. We've doubled it. We've doubled it. We are projecting to spend $2 million if enrollments hold at in charter school tuition costs. And when those commercials say that it's free, it is not free. Your tax dollars are paying tuition to the charter schools to the tune of $11,000 for a regular ed student, $21,000 for a special education student. So it's very costly for students to go there. And the red bar is actually the current forecast accurate as of the end of February.
Do you
So
have an idea how many students?
I do have that information. I just didn't bring it.
Rough number. I don't need-
Roughly 200 would be a fair one, but I can get you the actual breakdown without an issue. Oh, it's a number of students for sure. So that's some bad news. But I guess on balance, what I'm trying to say is we're not in too bad of shape in the current year, right? So one other note that I should say down in the very bottom is we're experiencing we're self-insured, as you know, with the health insurance, and there's something called, I believe they called it claim suppression, which is happening across the board in healthcare. And it's due to the pandemic. People aren't going for as much care, right? So we're experiencing, at least for the first half of the fiscal year, are experiencing some significant savings there as well. It's hard to quantify because anything can happen at any time. It only takes one high cost claimant or two, but we're experiencing some significant savings, which can help us erode that charter school tuition for 1 year time. So if the charter school recurs, that's obviously a big problem. So
Fair Valley, I recognize those are not all the expense items. Am I reading that right to say that the variance is basically wash out? Variance total of $100,000?
yes, those are the major expense line items. Yes. And that's roughly the total. So, yeah, so what I'm saying is, if you're trying to get a sense of where we're going to be, I don't have a number to forecast for you, but I don't suspect we'll be in a large deficit position at the end of the year. Somewhere around break even is where I'm currently forecasting us, but things are changing constantly. Every time we change modes of instruction, there's added costs or less cost, a lot of changes. So speaking of modes of instruction and COVID, here I get a lot of questions. What's it cost for all of this, right? So here are some of the things that we have spent related to COVID, right? So we bought about $250,000 worth of Chromebooks. That was the biggest single item. We had a intervention specialist to come in for the I believe trauma related to the stress related to the pandemic. Building safety, improving, getting rid of the traditional water fountains, putting in bottle filling stations, plexiglass in the main offices, nurses' office suite changes, whether it be dividers and ventilation to get negative pressure in there, antibacterial supplies, whether it's just hand sanitizer, backpacks to spray, the sanitizing solution, wipes, you name it, it's in here. If it's COVID related, we've tried to identify it. I'm sure there's some unidentified things. But as of the end of February, these are the things that were paid for. There are other things that were ordered to get us up and running, which you'll be seeing the bills for coming up, and we'll add to that list. But these are the items that were paid for already. So the number will grow, but we're at about $700,000 so far. So just a quick idea, an overview of what the 21-22 draft budget looks like. And I provided a copy on the PDE form for you. And I call this a draft. I don't call it preliminary because so much stuff is going to change between now and May. So just to give you an idea, using conservative revenue numbers, right? So not aggressive. We're not saying earned income tax is going to go up by 2%. We're saying, well, maybe it's going to decrease a little bit. Maybe there's some recession on the way. Using conservative revenue forecasts, meaning we're not budgeting anything from the state additionally, right? And also budgeting for what we believe the stimulus dollars coming in will be, which I'll talk about in a second. And then on the expenditure side, it's largely status quo. It's not budgeting for those 18 positions. It's budgeting for what we have right now. I believe we put in one additional, the administrative position and a teaching position. But that's really it, status quo, and that brings you to a budget of about $1.7 million on the deficit side. Again, a lot will change between now and then, and we'll refine. But taking a look at the revenues by category, I think they call this a donut graph, not a pie chart, right? So the takeaway here is if you look at the inner ring, that's 1920 audited financial results. The center ring is, I guess the middle of the two rings would be the 2021 budget, and the outer ring is 21-22 budget. And the takeaway here is, if you look at the local and federal shares over between the inner ring and the outer ring, we go from 68% to 64%. With no change in state, we're looking at federal filling the void. Now, federal is a grant, it's not a subsidy, right? So it goes away, and Dr. Mayen already alluded to that. So we're looking at unprecedented federal funds coming in. We'll talk about that in a second, but it is a change in structure of our revenues that is not insignificant. So at some point in time, that local funding has to be addressed, because we don't control what comes from the federal or the state. So speaking of local, real estate tax assessment have been a very hot topic, particularly in Lackawanna County, with what are we, 50, 60 years without a reassessment. We many years, for the last 5 to 7 years, we have enjoyed a small to moderate increase in our tax base, which has provided additional revenue to the district without raising taxes, which is a nice built-in padding. Unfortunately, this year the increase is so nominal, not because values didn't go up and not because homes weren't being built. In fact, 7 of 8 of our townships had increased in assessed value, 7 out of 8. But our largest one, South Abington Township, where all of the businesses are, has seen a decrease this year, and that offset basically all of the increases in the other townships. So we're seeing a lot of appeals, and we've seen actually one of our largest taxpayers demolish all of their the structures there, which will be rebuilt, right? But there's a lot of activity in South Abington, and there's a lot of activity with assessment appeals and particularly large value properties. So that's just something to keep an eye on there. And it's the first time we've seen a downward trend in South Abington in some time. Earned income tax trend. This is our second most valuable local revenue source, something we keep an eye on. Some of the peaks and valleys are subject to some timing of payment differences, but you can see the upward trend. Since the last recession, we've seen an upward trend, and I know that looks like a drastic drop off at the end, but what the takeaway there is really that we've collected half of what we expected to collect through 6 months of the collection period. So looking okay there. State funding, we were flat funded for the current year, and at the time we were very happy to be flat funded, but whenever you're flat funded, you're falling behind, right? So the state never gives you enough to keep up with the mandated pension increases and all the other inflationary increases that the district must pay. But what we have budgeted for, quite frankly, is for another year of flat funding, because the state has its own fiscal challenges. Now, they do have some stimulus funds on the way themselves, have no idea what that's to be used for or what it will be used for. But there is some state and local government relief on the way, as well as relief for the school districts. Governor Wolf has proposed a drastic increase in state aid. So that, I guess we would call the best case scenario, a landmark investment into basic education funding. But On the best case scenario, if the governor's proposal would be approved as is, we would get $168,000, which is, you know, not much additional funding for the district. That's a 2.5% increase on our basic ed funding. So just kind of a matter of perspective to try to, you know, summarize where we're at from a federal, state, and local perspective. So here's, I also get a lot of questions. What are you doing with your stimulus funds, right? So I've tried to detail here every single federal grant that has come out. And much of what we've been doing in the business office for the last 8 months has been federal grants and planning and stimulus and how to use it. And quite frankly, the only one that is squared away is the COVID-19 safety grant, which we spent on the Chromebooks and webcams for students. And why is that the only one squared away? Well, because we're still spending. We're trying, every grant has different uses, like in different rules, right? So we have to find which expense fits where. But the other thing we're trying to do is go after some additional FEMA funding, right? So we saw that opportunity was out there. So my team is working, like it's a lot of work to get this FEMA funding, but we've applied for somewhere around $100,000 of eligible expenses. And we hope to get back somewhere between $50,000 and $75,000. So we think it's a worthy cause. And if we get that FEMA funding, that will free up $50,000 to $75,000 in one of these other grants, which then in turns frees up $50,000 to $75,000 of taxpayer dollars. So well, they're all taxpayer dollars, but local taxpayer dollars. So this list, if you look at everything except for the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, marries up very neatly to the $700,000 that we spent on the COVID-related expenses. So that is good news that we're sort of matching the grants to the expenses, and you know, that we haven't put a lot of taxpayer local effort into the COVID, at least COVID identified expenditures. There are so many expenditures, but we're trying to draw a line somewhere on that. Expenditure totals by category. You can see the upward trend here versus the year to date. I like to look at it in terms of percentages. And in 2021, if you look in the lower part, you'll see 46% on salaries, 31% on employee benefits. That's 77% of your budget, which is fixed in just labor, right? So before you get started on seeing what you're going to do with supplies, 77% of your budget is already spoken for, right? So, and I don't think that is, the board well understands that, but for those who haven't seen the district's budget, we are largely fixed in nature, so. And then finally, I tried to move through this quickly. I know we've been at it a long time. We have more stimulus fund details coming out. We were waiting on the state budget to pass. Number of staffing decisions, which is pretty obvious at this point. There's a preliminary budget we'll usually present in the May work session, hoping to break out some of that new Forecast 5 software once the state uploads the 1920 data, which it's really cool, rankings and different things with the data. So then we have the preliminary budget, which must be passed in May. And then in the June board meeting, we pass the final budget. So thank you all for your time. And if anyone has any questions, happy to take them.
At this point, the budget you showing has no taxing.
Oh, yes, the most important thing, right? No, it does not have a tax increase in the budget. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Did we do a cost analysis of hiring all those positions? Is it 2 million roughly?
I think it was 18. So
Okay,
call it 2 million.
1.8 million, let's say.
Call it 2 million.
Okay,
And I don't foresee all of that shaking out. No, if there's an uptick in virtual and all that, maybe, but upper limit, $2 million.
and then if we could project what we think we would claw back in the cyber students, possibly to defray some of that, if we're spending 2 million on cyber, if we could cut the number of students in outside cyber, we would reduce.
That would be a guess. That'll be sure
But you
guess.
were surveying, I thought, or working
Well,
on,
no,
right?
well, we're writing to parents and
Right.
encouraging them, actively encouraging them to come back. So
And
we're
you're not-
reaching out.
Okay,
And we're seeing minor success. And
okay.
Great job.
I do want to thank Mr. Mirabelli, Mrs. Dewar and his office, his entire staff. This has been hard for everybody. What's that? Oh, and Mrs. O'Day, and Sue O'Day, yes, of course. Oh, my gosh, so sorry. And because this has been hard for everybody. And, the great strain has been placed on there. Our administrators are under great strain, but still, great things are happening. You could see people are on top of things in this school. It's a great privilege to work for a board and with such talented people. So I do want to make that point. I'm very grateful for their work. So I think I can stop sharing the screen now.
Yep.
That's all right. And then we'll turn this off. Yeah, we'll get the lights back on. I think we could turn this off. And so I think we could. Yes.
Oh, wait a minute, we didn't get through the agenda in the minutes.
That's a good spot. We do that on purpose. Then it can be
Okay,
Yeah,
so now we
yeah.
have to approve the agenda.
right.
Okay, Can I get a motion to? Can I have a motion to approve the agenda
No, second.
on the question? Roll call?
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman.
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski,
Yes.
motion carries 8-0.
Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting? What, I don't have that date in front of me. Was, do you have that date?
Third? No.
Was the work session
That would've
from
been
the
the
third
work-
and the,
Oh, no. March 10th, and then the board meeting prior, right?
and the prior, and
Yes.
February 17th.
Okay. March 3rd. Okay. Can I have a motion, please,
Move.
Second.
on the question? Roll call?
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri.
Yes.
Mr. Robeson,
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski,
Yes.
motion carries 8-0.
Do we have any board reports?
Yes, I have an AEIO report. We met last Tuesday for our March meeting. And we approved great extended funds for our high school TV studio. I don't know if anyone has had the opportunity to watch all of our sporting events and all of our concerts. It's this club, this TV club that is doing an incredible job reaching, and we've just granted them some more funds for different equipment that they need to continue to do their broadcasting. So they are a great group of kids with their advisor at the high school, and they've done an incredible job having our community reach the students and all the sporting events, and they are just a great group of kids. So we were really happy to grant them those funds. We also are trying to reach more of a student population. So we wrote some proposals to the state, and we were granted the opportunity to help out our AP courses and our AP classes and our students, and to defray some of the cost of their AP courses and tests and materials. So we will be working in conjunction with the district in setting up a fund for all of the AP students. And also, we also wrote a grant to see if we would get state approval for our geography club, who's purchasing great stuff. We just bought them a drone, and so we got state approval. So what that means is all of the tax credit dollars that we receive from communities and corporations, all of those funds can go directly to these organizations and programs that we're doing. So it's a great opportunity for the students. So any corporation that's listening to this right now, if when you're paying your taxes, please fill out your tax credit forms for the Abington Education Improvement Organization. And it's a great opportunity to enhance the education for our Abingtonite students. So thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Arzar, did you attend an NEIU meeting yet?
I went to my inaugural meeting, so I'm still, learning the ropes there. Obviously not an expert after one meeting, but not too much on the agenda there. They talked about administrative issues and some human resources issues, nothing that affects us yet.
Okay. Are we going to have our student representatives? Are they on the Zoom meeting?
Mr. Brzezowski, I'm not seeing them here. If you're here, could you maybe raise your hand and we would be able to better see you? Yes. Oh, good for you,
No?
Mr. Snyder. Thank
Okay.
you.
Just wouldn't want to not overlook them.
No, I didn't see them on here. So thank you, Mr. Snyder.
And I believe you have finished your superintendent's report. You have it on there
Yes,
twice.
indeed I am.
Gonna
Yes,
do
no,
it
one is
again, right?
enough. One
We're
is
not
enough
gonna
for
do it
sure.
again. Okay,
One is
good.
more than enough.
We'd like to hear that report again.
Right.
Sure thing, Mr. Hacker.
So at this time, if we have any members of the public who would like to address the board, if you could please raise your hand. And then state your name and where you live, and remember that you have a 3-minute limit.
Well, it looks like Mr. DeSarno, Phil DeSarno.
Okay.
Mr. DeSarno, I think you're on. Mr. DeSarno, could you try one more time? Okay, Mr. DeSarno, we may have to come back to you. Is there anyone else who would like to raise their hand to speak? I see none, Mrs. Brzezowski.
Okay.
But they can hear us, right? The communicate, right? So, but it appears Mr. DeSarno is not coming in either on the computer or on the speakers.
Would he like to call in a cell phone perhaps, or if he? Okay.
I don't see any
If
others.
at the
Right.
end of the meeting, if.
We can maybe
somehow-
try to
if it
get back.
comes up,
Yeah, so
we'll
Mr.
give him-
DeSarno, no, I don't think there is, Mrs. Cadman. So, Mr. DeSarno, if you wanted to maybe text Mrs. Leonard, we would try to get you involved, but at some point, there's a breakdown in the microphone.
Okay, at this time, I would like to request the board to approve the bills.
So,
On the question?
And this is Phil Robeson. So is this the fund accounting payment summary that we're looking to approve?
The bills, the checks?
Okay, the page numbers aren't on the pages, but it's the third from the end going backwards. There's a charge there for the 21st Century Cyber Charter School for $3,600. What is that for?
21st Century is a cyber charter school. That's tuition for students to go elsewhere.
So it's tuition for one student, or is it? It seems too low to be. It was 3,600.
3,600. It's probably 2 students for the month.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Roll call?
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Mrs. Bashalski?
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0.
Mr. Mirabelli, would you give the treasurer's report?
Certainly, we started with a cash balance of $26,251,816. We took in local revenues of $1,169,000, state revenues of $1,160,000, federal revenues of $59,000 for a total cash available of $28,639,000. We had disbursements of $3,738,606 for a net cash available of $24,900,470.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to approve
So moved.
Second.
on the question? Roll call?
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Dr. Cadman?
Yes.
Mrs. Bashalski?
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0.
Dr. Main, may we have the personnel report?
Thank you, Mrs. Bashowski. Request the board to approve the resignation, non-certificated, listed in item number 1.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mrs. Pusateri?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Dr. Cadman?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yeah.
Mrs. Bashalski?
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0.
And we request the board to approve the EDR positions as listed under item number 2.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Dr. Cadman?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri?
Yes.
Mrs. Bashalski?
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0.
And we request the board to approve advertisement for bids for art, athletic, general, maintenance, janitorial, and refuse collection.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Dr. Cadman?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bashalski?
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0.
And we request the board to approve the agreement with between the Abington Heights School District and Meadows Psychiatric Center for the 21-22 and 22-23 school years as contained in item number 1.
So moved. Second.
On the question? Call?
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Dr. Cadman?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mrs. Bashalski?
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0.
And we ask the board to consider a motion to approve the agreement between Abington Heights School District and the Regional Wide Area Network E-rate Consortium for services from July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2028, as contained in item number 2.
So moved.
Second.
On the question?
This
Why
is
are we,
Phil.
This 5 or 6 year contract,
It is.
5 years, is a pretty long time.
It is. This is a consortium of school districts through the NAIU. They put out proposals. And the thought is, at least through our analysis, and we were not always a part of this, that we see this as a very good deal. The term is long, but I think there's been investment in infrastructure and other things that require that length of service.
Same question.
So tech is, that's a long time for tech, but I think that to recoup some of the upfront costs, it's necessary. And at least at this moment, it's a very, very good deal.
When did we start? For a while, we did not use their services and because it was not really up to par, but I know we started using them. How long ago was that?
No, it's not been long. I mean, every year we would evaluate it and every year we believed that what we had going was better. But then I think we ran into some trouble with some of the providers and some cost analysis came through. So we looked at this very, very thoroughly. And while for many years we were not a part, we are very comfortably and enthusiastically a part of it right now.
Okay, good. Roll call?
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Dr. Cadman?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
yes,
Mrs. Pashowski?
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0.
And we consider a motion to approve the 2019-2020 local audit as contained in number 3.
so moved,
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Dr. Cadman?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
yes,
Mr. Azar?
yes,
Mrs. Pashowski?
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0.
And finally, request the board to approve the March volunteer list as contained in item number 4.
so moved,
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
yes,
Mr. Azar?
yes,
Dr. Cadman?
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski?
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0.
That's it for the personnel report.
That's it for the personnel report. Thank you.
We do not have any informational items. Do we have any new business? Old business?
And this is Phil Robeson, just in terms of what we discussed today, because we got bits of some subjects that were tied together with the different presentations. So the one thing that I would ask administration to do is, in looking at the cost, like the total cost of ownership of some of the staffing discussions that we had, to do just that, include total cost of ownership. So it's not just a single year of expense, especially if it's operating, including the historical increases for, inflation, salary, benefits, all those things, claims history and all that. Because I mean, I share in Mr. Fleming's concern, and we're all concerned about the increasing cost. But if we could have a break even in terms of how many students would have to utilize this service to justify the cost of actually having it versus them going to a cyber charter. And it seems like it's a complex thing, but I think we can get an idea, because the worst case, we didn't even talk about the worst case. The worst case is we invest all this time and money and no one goes to it. They go to cyber charter. Now, we don't think that's going to happen, but that could happen. Invest in this and they chose to go elsewhere, right? There's no legislation that says if you have this option, they have to come to us, right? So, and in that light, maybe it's an opportunity to reach out to local legislators like our senators and things like that to see if we can have some legislation that says, if you invest this much money or any money in having a cyber option, that the student should go to that school. I'm not saying that that's not in effect or anything, or it's not already in play, but this is a new time. It's a new scenario. And what I fear is that potentially we, as high as cyber is, if we invest in all the money to make this happen, to have our own cyber, we could actually be paying twice, right? Technically. So let's just be, I know you're going to do a great job doing the analysis, but if we could just have a break even of what that looks like to see, because maybe it's not 17 teachers, maybe it's 9 based on your analysis, and the data changes all the time. But I just wanted to be cautious, because what I saw up there and the cost of cyber on top of that, the worst case is something we didn't even talk about. So now the probability of that happening is probably low, right? But still, there's nothing that says we invest all this money and they go to charter schools more. That could happen. So it's a tough decision, right?
So, Mr. Ropes, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think our approach, though, at least in my mind, is the minimum amount of staffing to best serve the needs of our own students, right? And then, to the extent that we draw, I guess, it would be very hard for us, for reasons that I'll discuss later, for us to make a major impact in some of the cyber charter students. So if we see that there are no students in virtual next year for Abington Heights, our own students, which I don't think will be the case, but as one scenario, then the numbers of goes way down as far as some. Now, I do think some ancillary supports in the buildings are worthy of consideration regardless, but it will all depend on a number that we have a hard time envisioning now in March. If we do that minimum amount of service for our own, and we see that's a value that draws students, and I think we would escalate the amount of investment we have there because it pays off dividends for others. But I don't think we can really go in this with the idea of thinking that we're going to have in any way be able to pay for it by drawing back cyber charter students, because it's a sticky type circumstance from like an economic point of view, that we can talk about some of that later.
Well, the other consideration I would think is that in the unlikely event that we have 0 cyber students and we invest in this by hiring all these positions, I think then we are going to absorb those positions into our buildings, have smaller class sizes, and possibly not replace some of retirees. So suppose we were to add 17 positions and we have 8 retirees, and we're going to say, well, now we don't have to replace them. Now you've just cut that down in that unlikely event. You have smaller class sizes. So,
Yes.
I mean, there's so many.
And that's why
variables.
it should be a planning horizon,
Well,
like a
of course,
timeline.
right. So many variables, right?
But in terms of the other positions that you talked about, like, for example, the school nurse and the social worker, I mean, those are good ideas, I think warranted. So, but just the larger numbers that we talked about.
Definitely. Could not agree with you more. And to the extent that we ever move toward actually hiring people, you will see an absolute cost benefit. And we do have good experience reducing staff over time, not quickly, but reducing staff over time through attrition to meet the enrollment needs that we happen to face. And we would obviously continue to do that, be it up or down. We're seeing, actually, no surprise, an uptick in enrollment now. And we're monitoring residency is another issue that's rising quickly on our list of things to be concerned about because of just obvious circumstances. But yes, I agree with every word you said, Mr. Robson.
And just one other thing, just I think the analysis and the research around the 6 feet and the 3 feet did a really good job with that. Are there any counter examples where there were correlations or causations of cases with 6 feet versus 3 feet?
Yes, probably the best example is a case in Georgia that the CDC will often cite, where they did have outbursts, not the word, but spread internal transmission in the buildings, and it was very concerning and alarming. Now, the one caveat was that in all cases, the transmission was from adult to adult and adult to child. And even in those studies, there was no transmission child to child, child to adult. And so we draw from that some value in that all the vast majority of our adults have been vaccinated, second dose post 2 weeks. So we think that the circumstances that existed in that case in Georgia do not necessarily exist in Abington Heights. That's probably the worst of the studies. There was another one, I think, in Georgia where there was just absolutely no consideration given to any other mitigation strategy, and they did have outbreaks, which I also does not think apply to here.
So with that said, so that was good. Thank you. Is it possible to potentially relax the 6 feet versus 3 feet for lunch cafeteria? Because I know a lot of stakeholders that are in that lunchroom, and they've said a lot of positive things. And the one thing that keeps on coming up with my daughter and her friends is lunch.
Yeah,
Safely address that.
that Mr. Robson, is a bridge we have not yet crossed. I'll quote my response to Mr. Fleming earlier. No. Yeah.
I said I would try.
Any old business? I have some old
Want to
business.
just check to see if Mr. DeSarno made an attempt? I
Mr. DeSarno?
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me?
Can you see if the volume is up on this?
Hi, Dr. Mann, can you hear me?
Mr. DeSarno, could you try now?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we
Okay.
can. A loose wire, I think, was our problem.
No, that's okay. I apologize. I appreciate you taking a minute to speak to me. Again, Phil Desarno. I'm 110 Woodlawn Ave in Clark Summit. I have two children in the district, a first grader and a fourth grader. And I just wanted to take a minute just to address two things that were just kind of on my mind between last meeting and this meeting. I know last meeting, the keyword or buzzword that was thrown out a lot was just being fiscally responsible, which our district absolutely is. And I just wanted to kind of just talk just for a second about the one slide you had up where I think it was 2019, our per pupil spending for Abington Heights was $12,998 a student. And for similar districts to Abington was about $16,568, where, you know, comparing the savings, they spend about 27% more. And, you know, just my question that has been kind of going through my head is, you know, what are these comparable districts? Is it local districts like North Pocono? Is it districts maybe outside Philadelphia, like a Lower Marion or a Council Rock? And, you know, as a father of two students who will be in the district for the next decade, I'm wondering, you know, what that 27% difference means compared to those districts. What are those facilities in those districts like, you know, both academically and through sporting? You know, what are their classrooms look like? What's their student teacher ratio? I just know that we very pride ourselves on being, I guess we call it the best bang for our buck district. But if we were closer to that 16,000 per pupil spending like the state average, would we have better facilities for our children? Would we have a better student teacher ratio? I feel like we'd be able to take more pride in our district. And I know one of the things that Mr. Mirabelli talked about was our property value always going up. Could it be better? I just, you know, want to just continue to advocate for, you know, my children and the other children in the district. And, you know, I do appreciate all the board school hard work, but I just feel like if we also invested similar money into our students, you know, per pupil as similar districts did, you know, maybe our test scores would be higher. Maybe our property value would be even higher than it already is. And, you know, sometimes you do get more on your return if you do invest a little bit more. But I just wanted to bring that to the attention, just something that's been on my mind since the last meeting. And I appreciate your time. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. DeSarno. Thank you very much.
I just want to comment that, yes, all of all that spending would certainly improve teacher student ratio and facilities, but the cost to our taxpayers would be significant. And that 16,000 includes some of the, like the Philadelphia Southeastern districts,
Yeah,
correct?
it actually is a broad cross-section
Right.
of districts that have similar socio-demographic backgrounds as we do, but there actually is not much difference between just a flat state average and our peers, and the big difference between those groups and us.
Now, if you keep in mind that we spend 77% on salaries, a lot of those places have much higher debt service, which contributes to their cost per pupil, much higher, you know, building. There's a lot of factors. So I think we do pretty well without whacking our taxpayers too much. So anyway, that's just my comment.
Okay,
That's it.
old business, speaking
We're on
of,
old business, right?
speaking of facilities,
What?
I had inquired about painting the track and Dr. Mayan got back to me and said, we're waiting for Mother Nature and our track will be painted as soon as Mother Nature cooperates.
And we're thinking early next week.
Yay.
They may actually have been up there today putting the measurements down, and I think next week some sunshine is expected and they're going to be putting the marking down.
Is it open?
I was gonna say, yeah, can you just comment on the public use that a lot of people ask me, like, can we go up during the day, even when school's in session? Are we allowed to walk on the track?
Not during schools in session because the kids are out. But after hours, of course, now the track team is out there. But if people want to go for a walk on a weekend, that's totally fine. Although maybe not now as they're putting down the lines. But other than that, I think that it will be fine. Yes.
Should say, wait a couple of weeks.
Yeah, right. Anti-skid shoes were grade school. You know, wear your no skid shoes or whatever. No mark schools. No skid, whatever it is, right?
Okay, motion to adjourn? Okay. Good night, everyone. Great to